Hey guys, this is Mr. Lee with our study in Joshua chapter 4. Before we get started, I hope you guys are all doing well. I know that it's not easy. It's been a couple weeks that you guys have been home um, in the shelter in place, and I'm sure that there's a lot of challenges that go along with that. But anyways, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're staying healthy. That's the most important thing. And yeah, before we get into our study, I have a couple announcements. First of all, if you have not already, please join the Google Classroom. Here's the code. Just go to Google Classroom, just type that in, Google Classroom. This includes parents. Parents, you're allowed, you're invited as well if you'd like to join. In Google Classroom is where I post all the assignments, all the notes, all the like slideshows like this and everything. Um, this week's activity, what I want you to do is, this is in Google Classroom, I want everyone to post an image of something that you are finding comfort in this during this challenging time, during the shelter in place. Originally I thought, oh yeah, you should post an image of your furry friend, your dog or your cat or your fish or something like that, but not everybody has a pet. So post an image. It could be an image, it could be a video, it could be a GIF, it could be anything. Just post an image of something that is comforting you during this time. And if you want to add text, you can do that, but that's in Google Classroom. Okay, so as a reminder, this is where we're at. So the Israelites, the entire nation of Israel, which is well over 1 million, some scholars say it could be as much as 2 to 2.5 million people, have gone from Shittim, the starting point, and have crossed miraculously the Jordan River as God dried up the river. They crossed on dry ground, and now they are about to go into Jericho. Okay, and this city here called Gilgal, G-I-L-G-A-L, Gilgal, that's where they're going to camp out before they go into Jericho. Okay, so here we go. Let's read the text. Okay, this is Joshua chapter 4. When all the, and by the way, this version that I'm reading is called the NLT, the New Living Translation. So it might be slightly different than the NIV, the New International Version. But I like both of the versions very much. And so just to let you know, the version might be slightly different. Okay. All right, Joshua chapter 4. When all the people were safely across the river, the Lord said to Joshua, now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell the men to take 12 stones from where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. Okay, so first of all, I highlighted a couple of words. When all the people, remember, scholars are telling us that there was like 2 to 2.5 million people if you count women and children and everyone. Okay, 2.5 million people. Now, how long would it take 2 million to 2.5 million people to cross over the dried up Jordan River? Well, we don't exactly know because we don't know how wide they were. I mean, did they walk single file, columns of two? We don't know. But scholars have estimated that when they crossed the Red Sea, the previous generation crossed the Red Sea, it was an all-night thing. Like God parted the Red Sea at night, and they were crossing and crossing and crossing all the way until the morning light. So we're talking about several hours. So it might be, several hours that the priests were standing holding the ark, holding the presence of God, and the Israelites passed by the presence of God to the other side of the dried up Jordan River. So that is a lot of people. That's a long time. I also highlighted or bolded the words in the middle of the Jordan. So the priests had to stand there in the middle of the Jordan. And yes, the Jordan is dried up. Okay, they're standing on dry ground, but they're standing there for the entire time. The priests did not move. The priests were holding the ark of the Lord's covenant, and they stayed there. They waited there until the entire nation passed by. So Joshua called together the 12 men and told them, go into the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask, what do these stones mean to you? then you can tell them. They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a permanent memorial among the people of Israel. Okay, so I bolded a few more things. A few more things stood out to me. So each of you must pick up one stone and carry it on your shoulder. So if they're carrying a stone on their shoulder, these are huge stones that they are carrying. Okay, this is not just like a little, stone that you flick with your wrist and skip across the river. No, this is a huge stone. Okay, so each man is finding a huge stone from the middle of the Jordan River. Okay, and so this is a river rock or a river stone. Okay, and river stones are very, very different than other stones because other stones would probably be jagged and, but river stones, what happens is when a stone is sitting in the middle of a river for a long time, a couple beautiful things, transformations happen. First of all, over time, as that water flows over that stone, all the rough places become smooth. It becomes very, very, very smooth, right? And this reminds me of David when he goes down to the river and gets 5 stones as he's about to face Goliath. He gets river stones because they're very, very smooth, very round. They're going to fly very nicely. So these guys are getting huge boulders, huge stones, but river stones, so very, very smooth, out of the middle of the Jordan. Okay, and that's significant, and we'll talk more about that later on. Okay, and then what are they going to do with these 12 huge stones? They're going to build a memorial. Okay, why do they build a memorial, and what does the word memorial mean? Well, the word memorial sounds like memory, right? And so a memorial is something that we build or something that we do, something that we create in order to remember something, right? And if you have to remember something, that means that you tend to forget. And that is, human nature is to forget. Even as miraculous as this is, the entire nation of Israel crossing over the Jordan River on dry ground, God stopping the flow of the river, even though it's at flood stage, right? We forget these miraculous things that God does. That is human nature, okay? And so God is telling Joshua, and Joshua is telling the people, we need to build a memorial to help us remember because we will forget, right? And so I also bolded the word, they remind us that the Jordan River, because we forget, we naturally forget. So one of the principles in this story that we have to apply is that as we walk through life, as we walk with God, as we walk through the Christian life, we have to build in times of memorial, times that we remember what God has done, okay, in our lives. And it's very important. Also, okay, notice that the children will ask, and we are supposed to be remembering this for generations. So this miraculous thing that God did with the Jordan River, okay, that we experienced, our generation experienced, we have to share this blessing with future generations. This miracle is not just for us. This blessing is not just for us, but it's for future generations as well. Okay. So here is a little clip of a river. I love these little river clips. Some people find them very soothing just to hear and see the water flowing. Well, look at that rock. And after time, that rock that's kind of rough, that's in the middle of the river, over time, it's going to get smoothed out. All those rough parts of that rock are going to get very, very smooth. And the other thing about river rocks or river stones is that because they're sitting inside the middle of the river, there's lots of sediment that builds up. There's lots of minerals that build up, right, from all of the biological activity that's happening inside of here. And so these rocks become very, very colorful. So they become very smooth and very colorful. And here's an image of river rocks that are very, very colorful. And when I grew up in Michigan, we would go to Lake Michigan or Lake Huron, these Great Lakes, and we would see these just amazing river rocks, right? People would come from miles and miles away, different states. They would drive to Lake Superior or Lake Michigan and look for these river rocks. And some of them are really amazing. In fact, there's these rocks called Petoskey rocks, which are super cool. But anyways, these rocks are really well sought after. They're beautiful. They're already smooth. They're colorful. They're natural. And so a lot of people actually purchase these rocks for landscaping in their home. It's like here is like a bundle of river rock that people purchase for landscaping, right? But when we're talking about these river rocks, these river stones in Joshua's time, we're talking about huge, 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 massive river stones, right? Okay, let's read on. So the men did as Joshua told them, so they obeyed. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, one for each tribe, just as the Lord had commanded Joshua. They carried them to the place where they camped for the night and constructed the memorial there. Okay, so why did I bold the word Joshua? Well, this whole paragraph and this entire story is really a story of one of the main themes in the story is obedience to God, right? And so God had commanded Joshua. God didn't command the men. God didn't talk to the nation of Israel directly. God talked to Joshua. So God commanded the men through Joshua. Okay, so vicariously. So that's one of the things that applies to our life is that oftentimes God will put people in our lives like our parents or our teachers or certain authority figures that when we're obeying, okay, our job is to obey people who are in authority, and in sort of vicariously, we are obeying God's plan or God's will. Okay, so a lot of times when God wants us to do something, He won't just tell us, hey, I want you to do this. He won't tell us directly, but He will tell us through an authority figure or through someone else. And so as the men obeyed Joshua, the men were also obeying God. Okay, and that's one of the things that we have in our lives, especially, as a student when you're in high school or junior high or middle school, but it doesn't matter even when you get older, even when you're an adult. Okay, obedience to God doesn't always mean just directly obeying God. Sometimes it means God's plan is coming through other people. Okay, whether we like it or not, God works through other people. He always does. Okay, so Joshua also built another memorial of 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. The memorial remains there to this day. So Joshua goes out into the middle and he says, you know what, it's not enough to have this memorial on the banks. Okay, I'm going to build a memorial right in the middle of the Jordan River. Okay, now that might seem a little weird, like that. Like, is that crazy? Like, why would he build a memorial right in the middle of the Jordan? Well, I am guessing that he built a memorial in the middle of the river of huge, very sturdy, very strong stones that probably will not just get washed away, right? Because he's building it in the middle of the Jordan. And by the way, the priests are still standing there holding the Ark of the Covenant, and they must be pretty tired because the entire nation is passing through. And then here comes Joshua. Wait, who is that coming back into? You're going backwards. You're coming back into the riverbed. And oh, it's Joshua. And what is he doing? He's rolling these huge boulders and he's stacking them up in the middle of the Jordan River. And whoever the author is of this chapter of this book says the memorial remains there to this day. So even after they leave and the river rushes back down, Joshua built such a strong memorial that it stood even the rushing river at flood stage. Okay, and why would he do that? Well, we're going to find out. When we find out more about what these memorials look like and what they're about, I think it'll make a little bit more sense why Joshua would build one in the middle of the river. Okay, let's continue. So then the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant to come up out of the riverbed. So Joshua gave the command, and as soon as the priests carrying the Ark of the Lord's Covenant came up out of the riverbed, the Jordan River flooded its banks as before. And I skipped a few verses. Okay, I went from verse 8 and 9 to verse 15. Okay, so I'm sure that the priests were probably pretty relieved when Joshua said, "Come on up." Okay, it's time to come out of the riverbed. But as soon as they get, out of the riverbed, the flood stage starts again. All right, from verse 19. The people crossed the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Is the first month January? I don't know. I don't know if they had the same calendar. Probably not. Okay, the month that marked their exodus from Egypt. Okay, they camped at Gilgal, east of Jericho. It was there at Gilgal that Joshua piled up the 12 stones taken from the Jordan River. Okay, so I highlighted Gilgal. So Gilgal, I showed you on the map, is not that close. It's definitely inland from the river. It's not like right on the banks of the Jordan River. Okay, and the thing that sticks out to me here is that Joshua makes a pile. He makes this piling of the 12 stones from the Jordan River. Okay, these river stones, these river boulders, he piles them up at Gilgal. Okay, and Gilgal is far away, so these stones are definitely out of place. This piling of river stones is definitely out of place because these river stones are probably colorful. They're probably very, very smooth. They don't look like they don't belong there in Gilgal, right? They belong in the river. So this piling and this piling is known, we have a word for it. It's called a cairn, Cairn. This cairn that Joshua builds looks very conspicuous, right? And that is on purpose. This memorial that he's building to God is something that is not to be just hidden. It's something that is to be conspicuous so that people stop and look at it and go, "Whoa, that is interesting. I wonder what that is all about." Like, I wonder what the cairn builder was thinking. Like, why did he build a cairn way out here? Okay. And because it's so conspicuous, people will ask, and that gives an opportunity to talk about and to share the story of God's miraculous blessings. Same thing with the cairn. I think same thing, this is my opinion, same thing with the cairn that Joshua built in the middle of the Jordan River. It looked so conspicuous. Like, it's definitely not just naturally, these stones didn't just stack themselves up, right? Somebody went there, and you would have to wonder, wait a second, how did somebody go into the middle of the Jordan and make this structure of river stones? How did they do that? And so Joshua is testifying that there was a miraculous thing that happened here because you couldn't just go and, like, they didn't have like scuba gear where somebody could like scuba dive and like build a cairn in the middle of the Jordan River, right? So Joshua was doing things in a very conspicuous manner to testify of God's miraculous blessings. All right, let's continue. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, "In the future, your children will ask, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you can tell them, 'This is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground.'" So he's probably telling millions of Israelites, okay? And the Israelites were probably like wondering, what the heck is Joshua doing making a cairn here? What is he doing piling up these huge river boulders? And so Joshua is kind of explaining it to them, and he's saying, your children will ask. He's not saying they might or if they ask, he says they will. People are going to notice this and wonder what the heck is going on. Okay? And Joshua's saying when they ask, you have to be prepared to share the story of this miraculous blessing that God has done in your life. Okay? You can tell them this is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it dry until you were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea when he dried it up until we had all crossed over. He did this so that all the nations of the earth might know the power of the Lord, and that you might fear the Lord your God forever. One thing about the book of Joshua, one thing about the gospel, one thing about God's love, one thing about God's story is that it is for all nations, it is for all people. It is not just a blessing that's supposed to be contained by the Israelites. And so that still applies to us today. When God does something miraculous, when he blesses us, okay, we are not, you know, special in terms of, supposed to be, we're not supposed to like hoard God's blessings. Okay. When he blesses us, that is also a charge or a command to us to share that blessing with others. In fact, the more God blesses us, the more we are to share that blessing with others. Okay, that's the purpose of God's blessing. God doesn't bless us so we're not like a dead end for God's blessings. Okay, instead, God's blessings are to flow through us to all nations. Okay, that is how it's supposed to work. So here's a couple things, here's a couple thoughts that really stand out to me. Go into the middle of the Jordan and later build a memorial, right? Build a memorial. So that's really important for us to do. It's really important that when we cross over our Jordan, when God brings us across our own Jordan, whatever challenge that is raging at flood stage right in front of us, when God gets us across that, we shouldn't just move on ahead of God, right? We should go back and we should somehow memorialize what God has done. Okay, and the reason we memorialize it is number one, because human nature is we forget, and number two, in the future your children will ask. Believe it or not, I know you guys can't even imagine having your own children. You guys are like 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, but I'm telling you, time flies, and many of you will probably have your own children. And one thing I can tell you about children is when they're young, they ask a lot of questions. And that is a blessing. That's a blessing to us because as we get busier and busier with life and with taking care of things and with work and with all these things, we tend to forget God's miraculous blessings and God's work in our life. But when we have our own children and they ask us all these questions, we have to be ready to share with them. And not just with our children, but with all nations. All right, so this idea of a cairn, okay? Ooh, cute. No, that's a cairn. That's a cairn terrier, but that's not the type of cairn I'm talking about. Okay, this is the cairn I'm talking about. Okay, according to Wikipedia, that amazingly accurate source, a cairn is a man-made pile of stones. The word cairn comes from the Scottish Gaelic cairn. Cairns have been and are used for a broad variety of purposes from prehistoric times to the present. In modern times, cairns are often erected as landmarks, as they have a use they have had since ancient times. The cairns have been around for as long as people have been around, and there's been stones. People are like, hey, let's pile up these stones, right? In fact, there is a lot of people that build these cairns, like all over in particular places. And you're supposed to do it very respectfully. You're not supposed to just build cairns just for the sake of just stacking stones, right? People consider it, there's actually uses for cairns. Like in the old times, cairns actually pointed the way, pointed the directions on which way to go. So if you're climbing a mountain or something, cairns are somebody ahead of you that is helping you point the way, the correct way that you're supposed to go. These days, there's a whole community of cairn builders that build cairns out of respect for the beauty, the aesthetic beauty of the area. So cairns are built to guide us. Cairns are built as a memorial for certain things. Cairns are also built to be noticeable, right? Because they're obviously not, naturally, stones just don't stack themselves naturally. But they're built to create some kind of notice. Okay, so here's an image of a cairn. Here's another image of a different type of cairn, where it's kind of pyramidical. So here's some application for us, okay? We forget. It's human nature. Okay, so it's very important that we build, okay, in our lives, we need to build memorials. Okay, many of you, well, yeah, many of you like to journal, and journaling is a wonderful, wonderful way to build memorials. But when you journal, once in a while, you need to go back and read those journals, especially read the parts of your life where God has done something amazing and has helped you in some way overcome or face some kind of challenges that we have. Okay, it's very important that we build memorials. Tell your story. Your story is not just for you. We have to be ready to tell our story. And when I talk about our story, we have to see that our story is not just our story, it's God's story through us. And then finally, the whole book of Joshua, it's an interesting study. One of the themes that flows all the way through it is this issue of obedience. Obedience. And here's a couple quick things on obedience. Okay. First of all, Joshua's obedience is exact. Like he obeys exactly what God tells him to do. The people of Israel obey Joshua exactly how they what he tells them to do, right? But in the book later on, we're going to find out what happens when obedience is not exact, when it's partial obedience. Is partial obedience really obedience? I don't know. Immediate. Obedience is immediate. Joshua doesn't hesitate and wait. And I've been guilty of this in my own life. I know so many times I feel like God is prompting me to do something. And there's been times when, I'll be honest with you, I did not obey immediately. I hesitated. I had doubt. I grappled with, is this really the right thing for me to do? Even though I knew it was God telling me to do something. And if obedience is not immediate, then is it really full obedience? Obedience needs to be complete. We can't just do like 70% of what God tells us to do. We have to do all that God tells us to do, even if it doesn't make any sense to us, like go grab stones out of the middle of the riverbed and pile them up, right? Even if it doesn't make sense for us, obedience needs to be complete. And then finally, extreme obedience. Next chapter, chapter 5 for next week, we're going to see an example of sometimes God calls you to extreme obedience, right? And how does that apply to us right now? Well, in my neighborhood, I see a lot of people that are not really completely obeying the law, right? I see a lot of people that are not helping society flatten the curve because they're so like, it's all about me. They're so selfish or whatever that, and I'm not judging because I don't know everyone's situation, but I'm sure that there are some people that are just like, who cares? I'm healthy. I'm not gonna do this. But we have to obey completely. If everyone in the United States obeyed the law completely, right? With even just this one thing, with the COVID-19 thing, with the shelter in place thing, if everybody obeyed their local laws completely and stayed home, I think we really could flatten the curve. But instead of flattening the curve, it seems like we're, just on that surging part of the curve. So, yeah, these are our applications for this week. Oh, don't forget to post an image of someone that comforts you, something that comforts you. These are my two doggies, Hogan and Kipper, and they are so happy that we're staying home. I can't tell you, they've never had so many walks in their life, and they're super happy. Anyways, love you guys. Hope you're doing well. I'm praying for you. I know it's not easy. It's mentally, physically, and spiritually challenging to be, sort of sheltered in place. So I am praying for you. And yeah, stay well, stay healthy, and I will see you hopefully soon. Take care.